Hello, gorgeous people. Welcome and welcome back, as the case may be. I am so glad you're here. I appreciate it very much. So, the headlines: DeSantis sends migrants to Martha's Vineyard. And so the question then becomes, was this astonishing Republican cruelty? Unknown in the annals of human cruelty? Or was this just USA business as usual? Well, this historian's verdict, as you already know, is that this is just USA business as usual. Was it a trick? Yes. Was it cruel? Yes. Were the people on Martha's Vineyard, welcoming? Yes. But what is the context? These judgments really mean very little once you understand the bigger picture. Was it cruel? Yes. But everything about immigration is cruel. Whether we're talking about asylum seekers, as were these people from Venezuela and Colombia, whether they are here legally on an employer's visa, or whether they cross our border, primarily our southern border, without papers, as they say. In other words, illegally. It's all cruel. There is nothing kind, straightforward about it. It's trickery and cruelty is just, there is no immigration story without cruelty and trickery. So let's dig down into why I say that. Let's dig down a little bit. And so let's talk about asylum seekers. It is completely legal for a person to cross our borders without papers and to request asylum. They can do that legally at any time and at any point in the United States. But let's talk about a case of somebody that I know, that I talked to, and what his situation was. And I think it will help illuminate at least a little bit of what it means to be an asylum seeker to the United States. I spoke with a man who was from Ghana. He was a gay man. He was a Muslim. And because he was gay, he was under threat of his life from his tribal leaders, from his family, and from his Islamic leaders. And so he did everything strictly by the book. He left Africa and he came in through our southern border. He came in at El Paso. He went through the turnstile at El Paso and immediately turned himself in and immediately requested asylum, which is absolutely, he didn't put a step wrong. What happened? He was put in jail in El Paso, supposedly awaiting his hearing with a judge. He was there for 18 months. He never had any sort of hearing. He never had any sort of word about what was going to be his fate. He stayed there for 18 months, and then he was sent to Alabama, to Gadsden's notorious immigration prison. When I spoke with him, he had been in Gadsden for about 6 months. So we're now talking 2 years. And Gadsden is notorious for not feeding its prisoners enough and for feeding its prisoners food which is out of date. So you can imagine this man who is Islamic on top of everything else, how he might have felt about having no option but to eat out-of-date hot dogs. So that's one story about an asylum seeker that I personally talked to, and there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of stories like that out there. Let's talk about those who come legally on an employer's visa. And typically the visas are the H-2A for agricultural workers and H-2B for non-agricultural labor. And there again, I've talked to so many myself, but if you have a quick minute, you can Google the Southern Poverty Law Center's report on the guest worker program, and they've labeled it, they've titled the report Close to Slavery. It was authored by an attorney whose name is Mary Bauer, who appears in my documentary, The Second Cooler, in the sequence on the guest worker program. It is not, the guest worker program is not slavery per se, but what it is per se is indentured servitude and human trafficking. I don't see any way around that. That is cruel. It is cruel to have people bound by law to their one employer, and it is not unusual for people to be tricked into what it is they will be asked to do and what they will not be asked to do. So, for example, if a young man comes to an employer on the Gulf Coast and thinks he's going to be shucking oysters for a fair wage with decent accommodations and so forth, and if that employer actually wants him for sexual services, there's nothing he can do about it. He cannot go down the road and find an employer who will treat him well. He is bound to that employer, and that employer holds all the cards. He is very likely in debt. He very likely had to sell a parcel of his land or his motorcycle or something to get the money it took to get the visa. Say $1,500 is not an unusual sum. $1,500 for me is not all that much money, but $1,500 for people who are coming on the guest worker program, it's a heck of a lot of money. And they do it out of necessity, not for any other reason. But I've talked to people, I've talked to guest workers. I went down into central Mexico to talk with guest workers in 3 industries who were involved in lawsuits against their employers. Those industries were tobacco in North Carolina, vegetables in Georgia, and citrus in Florida. And just to give you one example of the trickery involved, they negotiate, of course, for a certain wage, for a certain job. And so what had happened with the workers who had been in the Florida orange groves, they of course were taken and housed out way outside of any town that they could get to easily. And in order to cash their check, they had to get on the employer's bus and be driven to the bank where they cashed their check. But in order to get back on the bus, to go back out to the fields, they had to turn over 50% of their wages back to the overseer who was on the bus. Trickery. In terms of trickery, putting 50 people on a bus, on a plane, and promising them a job that doesn't exist, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing to do. No governor should be involved in something like that. But in the context of immigration overall, that kind of trickery is just, how shall I say it? That's small potatoes in terms of trickery, which is rampant. Or we can talk about the cruelty of what has been done to people who are crossing the border illegally, and the only reason people cross illegally is because the United States does not allow them to cross legally, and I went into that in a previous video. Um, but it was under President Clinton that Doris Meissner, who was then chair of what has now become the Department of Homeland Security, proposed something they called very politely prevention through deterrence. The deterrence part of the prevention package was to funnel migrants away from the relatively safe urban areas and into the extremely inhospitable Sonora Desert. There was an expectation of migrants dying due to exposure, due to lack of water, due to the freezing cold, due to the 110 degrees or higher temperatures. It was expected that they would die. So if you want to talk about cruelty, we need to get real. We need to do something about not just Republicans' cruelty, which there is that, but we need to talk about Democrats' cruelty. It was Clinton who signed the Prevention Through Deterrence bill, which was a massive failure. Thousands of migrants have died, and the people have not stopped coming because they have very little option. And we have helped create so many of the conditions from which they are fleeing. There was the coup in 2009, supported by President Obama and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, which caused untold suffering to Honduras. There have been the sanctions against for Venezuela. I mean, we are contributing. So, and our leaders know what they're doing. They're not idiots. They know what they're doing, and they do it anyway. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats or whoever they are, it's all trickery and it's all cruel, and it needs to stop. And the only way these things are going to stop is if we get ourselves more well educated about the realities of immigration, and we really need to put into a larger context what it means to send 50 asylum seekers from Texas to Massachusetts, and we need to put in the welcoming of the residents of one of the most wealthy cities, or it's not one city, it's a cluster of cities anywhere on the globe, for 48 hours. We've got to put that into some sort of broader context and know what it is we're condemning and know what it is we're celebrating. Now, I've also noticed that commentators, even those who are left of center ostensibly in their politics, who are, as I am, very critical of Obama, the Clintons, and Biden when it comes to immigration, they too don't really understand the terms that are being used quite often, not exclusively, but quite often. For example, sanctuary city is a meaningless term if what people think of by a sanctuary city is a city where, like the people for 48 hours in Martha's Vineyard were, as a place where people are welcomed, where they're not mistreated. That is a very, that really has nothing to do with what a sanctuary city is. A sanctuary city that has any real meaning is a city, and basically it's not even a city or a state, it's a county that makes the decision not to cooperate with ICE detainer requests. That's the only time it has any meaning whatsoever. There is no place where ICE cannot go. There is no place in the United States where Border Patrol cannot go. at least Border Patrol is supposed to stay within a certain radius. And I'll just talk about that in just a second. By the way, if you're getting anything out of this, if you would hit the like button, that would tickle me to death. I would appreciate it so much. But a sanctuary city is a city in which the the sheriff's office has decided it will not cooperate with ICE detainer requests. And what these detainer requests are, and it is completely voluntary to cooperate or not to cooperate. But what happens is that when someone is booked in on whatever charge that he or she is booked in on, they are fingerprinted as they are processed in, and those fingerprints are sent off to ICE. And if the prisoner has ever had any contact with ICE, then they will have a record of that with their fingerprints, and they will send a request to the county to hold this particular person over for 48 hours so that they can get down to the local prison and pick that person up and put them into deportation proceedings. Now, if somebody whose knowledge is deeper, we could tweak that a bit. We could finesse that up a bit, but that's basically what it is. And so there is no place. So people promote the idea that we need to be the kind of place where people are welcome, where they can feel safe. Well, that is baloney if the county of that place is still cooperating with these 48-hour detainer requests. And those detainer requests amount to a second arrest and a second imprisonment without any charges or any due process whatsoever. So these are a real problem, and we can do something about it, but only if we know what we are actually up against and what we're talking about. And you can't know things that nobody's ever told you, so that's my job. Or a border town. I heard several of the mayors say that, of the northern cities saying, well, we are not a border town. We are not equipped to handle asylum seekers or migrants. We don't have the infrastructure, said one. And in fact, I don't think a lot of that these mayors really understood that they are a border town. For Border Patrol purposes, if their town is within 100 miles inward or inland from any border, that means the Gulf of Mexico, that means the Atlantic, that means the Great Lakes, that means the Pacific. If you live in a town that's within 100-mile radius of that water, basically, you are within Border Patrol territory. Border Patrol operates there. If you are in an airport that has any sort of foreign carrier service, you'll find Border Patrol there. So there's but speaking specifically to the idea that we are not a border town, we here in the North or the Midwest. In fact, you are a border town, and if you're a mayor of that city, I think it would be a good idea to understand that that Border Patrol is routinely boarding trains and buses and boats and asking people to see their identification who have done nothing and are under suspicion of having done nothing based on what they look like. The thing about 9/11 is things were bad for immigrants, for those who came illegally and otherwise before 9/11. But 9/11, or if you're not in the States, I'm talking about the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. Those terrorist attacks became a rationale not only for militarizing the border, which was also well underway by 2001, for increasing the militarization, the numbers of Border Patrol agents, and the infrastructure, all of that. It also became the rationale for ginning up the idea that people crossing the border illegally could possibly be terrorists. And that became the rationale or the mission of Border Patrol at that time. It became the mission was to stop terrorists and their weapons from crossing our borders. Now, I don't go to Border Patrol's website every day of my life. I don't go there very regularly at all. But the last time I did go and check, Border Patrol, according to its own website, had not apprehended a single terrorist at our southern border. And so this was the connection. When we talk about cruelty and trickery, nobody actually thought that indigenous people coming up from their traditional farms from southern Mexico had the possibility of being a terrorist. They knew better than that. But it provided a good rationale, and it sort of fit into my whole thoughts about trickery and cruelty. That's my little tutorial for today. I really hope you got something out of it. I hope you'll hit the like button if you did. I hope you'll consider subscribing, because it would just delight me no end to have you come back. And that's it for now. So take care. Bye-bye.